Welcome back to Crossroads, everyone. Several agents of the Chinese Communist Party have been arrested for conducting a brazen operation on U.S. soil. I'll be going into the details on this, so stay tuned. The Department of Justice announced it charged 8 people and made 5 arrests in relation to China's Operation Fox Hunt on U.S. soil. Also, 600 U.S. groups linked to the Chinese Communist Party have been exposed. These include businesses, universities, think tanks, social and cultural groups, which have been pushing the regime's political and economic interests in the United States. And also among the swirl of information being released on Hunter Biden has been direct emails provided by a former business partner which point to various pay-to-play deals, among other issues. Now those emails and additional information were provided to Seamus Bruner. We've invited him to speak with us about this, so stay tuned for that. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. The Chinese regime had agents who were sent to capture Chinese targets on American soil. The Chinese Communist Party's program, called Operation Fox Hunt, included coercing targets to return to China, threatening their families, and pressuring them to commit suicide. And on October 28th, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it charged 8 people in the plot and made 5 arrests. Now, FBI Director Christopher Wray said in a Department of Justice statement, quote, "The Chinese government's brazen attempts to surveil, threaten, and harass our own citizens and lawful permanent residents while on American soil are part of China's diverse campaign of theft and malign influence in our country and around the world."
It's important to understand that Fox Hunt is part of the Chinese government's diverse campaign of theft and malign influence. China is violating laws and norms, left and right, from sophisticated cyber attacks targeting our data and personal information, to economic espionage targeting our intellectual property and our trade secrets. And they're using that information to gain influence on the world stage, to gain economic and political power, all to their benefit and all very much to our detriment.
The CCP operation that was taking place in the United States has been known about for years. In 2015, then President Barack Obama warned the Chinese regime over this operation, but little was done. The program has been known about since at least 2014 and is designed to repatriate fugitive targets by the Chinese Communist Party abroad. Now, however, Chinese agents who were part of the operation are facing prison. The criminal complaints allege that the CCP agents had been pressuring for 3 years a former Chinese government employee, his wife, and his daughter, who have lived in New Jersey since 2010. The 5 defendants who were arrested include Chinese citizens who are permanent residents or naturalized U.S. citizens, as well as a Western private investigator they had hired. The 3 defendants who were charged but not arrested remain at large in China. Now, what is Operation Fox Hunt? The Chinese Communist Party launched this under Xi Jinping. Now, going back a bit, Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, is launching an anti-corruption campaign inside China. Behind that is actually the factional battles, mainly between his faction and the Jiang faction. Jiang Zemin being 2 leaders ago. In China, not everything is controlled by Xi Jinping. A lot of different parts of the country are still under the control of the Jiang faction. And the Jiang faction has been vying for control over China with Xi Jinping. Now, Xi Jinping caught wind of a lot of these operations and began what he called his anti-corruption campaign, arresting thousands of high-level Chinese Communist Party officials. Among them, for example, Zhu Yongkang, the Chinese Communist Party security czar. Many top-level officials have been purged under this operation. And along with that, Xi Jinping launched Operation Fox Hunt, targeting Chinese officials who have fled abroad or who are operating abroad. Now, when it comes to these agents of the CCP operating abroad who are targeted by Operation Fox Hunt, not all of them are good. Some of them may have been tied to the system, some were laundering money, some were carrying out operations of the CCP on American soil or other foreign soil. But many of them also have moved on from that, and many of them are seeking to, say, find refuge from the Chinese Communist Party. And the CCP in this brazen operation was targeting these individuals regardless of U.S. law. This shows the Chinese Communist Party's disregard for American sovereignty. It shows that they're willing to carry out operations like this on American soil. And as I've noted in previous episodes, under things like the United Front Work Department, the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, they also target Chinese dissidents in very similar ways. The Chinese Communist Party has brazen operations targeting Chinese Americans on American soil, even second and third generation Chinese, even sometimes Westerners. And so again, this shows that the United States is standing up against that. Now, with that said, just prior to these recent arrests, the Chinese Communist Party was already threatening retaliation against the United States. The U.S. had arrested, for example, some Chinese alleged agents, we can say, who were tied to the Chinese Communist Party's military. These individuals facing charges in the United States on things like, for example, intellectual property theft or similar programs. But in China, the Chinese Communist Party is threatening tit-for-tat retaliation, meaning basically they can go after anybody, like what they did, for example, with Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, this Chinese telecommunications company, who was arrested in Canada. The Chinese Communist Party arrested 2 individuals who were Canadian citizens and charged them with espionage. They're facing the death penalty. And the CCP is offering, basically a glorified prisoner exchange for them, for Meng Wanzhou. The CCP can trump up charges on anything it wants, and it's threatening to do this right now against the United States. Now, meanwhile, the CCP is moving forward with plans we discussed before, which may allow party leader Xi Jinping to extend his rule with a 15-year plan. Nikkei reports the CCP is holding the 5th plenum of the 19th Central Committee and will be having an unconventional discussion on plans for 2035. Normally, for example, these are only 5-year plans. This is going to be a 15-year plan. And as the report notes, this is being viewed by many China watchers as a move that's laying the ground for Xi Jinping to continue holding office past his technical end date on 2022. And yes, Xi Jinping already got rid of term limits, but that would only maintain him basically as a figurehead in China. He would not really have power over the CCP. The current moves he's now making would very likely give him long-term and deep control over the Chinese Communist Party. Now, meanwhile, Newsweek had an exclusive story that identified 600 U.S. groups linked to the Chinese Communist Party, which are working to push the regime's political and economic interests on foreign soil. These include businesses, universities, think tanks, social and cultural groups, Chinese organizations, Chinese language media and chat groups, and others. It notes that the identified groups are, quote, all in regular touch with and guided by China's Communist Party. It notes as well that similar operations are found throughout the world, and many of these are connected to the United Front. The report states that, quote, the Chinese government has frequently denied the Front's role in overseas influence and interference operations, yet it allocates a large amount of money to its work, indicating it is a priority. It notes as well the Chinese Communist Party's budget for the United Front was more than $2.6 billion in 2019, with close to $600 million earmarked for overseas Chinese communities and foreigners. This means the CCP puts more money into its United Front work than it does into its foreign ministry. Now again, I've been investigating the United Front since 2008. A lot of the original stories on this were broken by the Epoch Times. This is a system designed to subvert the United States and other countries from within. It's actually good to see it finally getting broader coverage. And so what is the United Front? This is a Chinese Communist Party branch dedicated to gaining control over the influencers of targeted countries, gaining control of the elites, the politicians, the business leaders, the journalists, the academics, and so on, the people who control the direction of the country. When the Chinese Communist Party subverts them through many methods, including money, through sex traps, through business interests, and other things, the CCP controls them and thereby gains influence over the country itself. Now, folks, among the swirl of information being released on Hunter Biden, son of Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, has been direct emails provided by a former business partner of Hunter, which point to various pay-to-play deals, among other issues. Now, those emails and additional information were provided to Seamus Bruner, author of Compromised: How Money and Politics Drive FBI Corruption, and author of the new book as well, Fallout: Nuclear Bribes, Russian Spies, and DC Lies. To learn more about the emails from Hunter Biden's business associate, we've invited Seamus Bruner to speak with us. Let's jump into that now. Hey, welcome back, folks. Today we have with us Seamus Bruner. You might remember him from the book Clinton Cash. He has a new book out now. It's Fallout: Nuclear Bribes, Russian Spies, and the Washington Lies that enriched the Clinton and Biden dynasties. Now, you might have seen some of the recent leaks about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, particularly some of the emails coming from Hunter Biden's business associates. Well, Seamus Bruner has some of the information on that. He's been the recipient of some of these emails. So we're going to talk with him now about this and the information he's been looking at. So, Seamus, it's great having you on Crossroads.
It's great to be here.
So this whole Biden scandal, as it's becoming, it's called a conspiracy theory by a lot of news outlets. They're saying it might be disinformation, it might not be, but you shouldn't look at it because, you know, it may all be false, and don't even look. A lot of different news organizations are portraying the whole thing as just a disinformation campaign, a scandal. Maybe they'll even try to say it's Chinese interference at some point, because now we have a political faction in China trying to provide evidence on it as well. And also there's leaks coming from multiple different directions, to the extent, I think, that even a lot of people who do believe in it are having trouble following it. And so why don't we start off, tell me the information you've gotten. What's the information you've been looking at and getting directly so far?
So we've been working with several other investigative journalists. Matthew Tiermond provided us access to Bevan Cooney, who is a Hunter Biden business associate. But just before we get to the emails and all of that, I'd like to take it back to 2018, because a lot of people think this is, you know, October surprise or just for the election to tarnish Joe Biden's name. And it actually, these stories, the Ukraine story and the Burisma gas company and the China deals, the $1.5 billion private equity deal backed by the Chinese government that Hunter Biden's firm got. These stories were released in 2018 in a book called Secret Empires. I worked on that book. My boss, Peter Schweitzer, really broke this news down in 2018. Joe Biden wasn't a candidate. We didn't ever think Joe Biden would run for president. We kind of just followed the money. We looked at these deals and we got some tips that Hunter Biden and other Biden relatives, there's actually 5 Biden relatives who have been working these deals that basically leverage the Biden family name, and it's all while Joe Biden is vice president. So bringing that forward to today, it's interesting that some of these business partners of Hunter Biden, I mean, people who say it's a conspiracy theory, just look at Hunter Biden's business associates. They are the ones who are providing these emails. These emails go back 10, 15 years in some cases. And we've been given access to a Gmail account with the credentials. So this isn't, you know, stolen, hacked, planted, manipulated. It's like just like when any of the viewers might log into their Gmail account, we got that kind of access to it. So then we just started searching terms that we knew from the work back in 2018, and we found that you know, these deals were a huge priority. The Burisma deal, the Ukraine deal, the China deal with Bohai Harvest. They're talked about extensively, and every time that they close the deal, Hunter Biden's business associates are celebrating. So that's the Bevan Cooney emails that we were given exclusive access to, but there's now more and more Hunter Biden associates coming forward. A man named Tony Bobulinski, who just recently did his first public interview. It's an incredible interview, and he really like reveals. He's a Democrat donor, by the way. This isn't he's not doing this for the election. He just couldn't really sit by while all of, you know, the Bidens are claiming this is all Russian disinformation. That's really what caused him to come forward.
Well, on that, I mean, it's interesting because, again, there's so many different directions to it and so many people stepping forward. And it's hard for people, I think, to, on one side, be able to follow which information is coming from where, which information they would deem as credible, which information is questionable based on the sources. And also, from another standpoint, I think the fact that you have multiple sources corroborating the same basic claims. I mean, if we look at the evidence and narratives that were used to form previous scandals, especially targeting Trump, a lot less evidence came out on those. Sometimes no real direct evidence at all. And media ran with it nonstop, but this one they're kind of ignoring or saying it's disinformation without really having a basis for saying so. I guess what would you say to people who believe this is disinformation?
Well, there's a reason that faith and trust in the mainstream media, you know, the big networks, there's a reason that faith in that is at an all-time low. People don't trust the media to give them the truth. So, I mean, you know, if CNN is saying this is fake news, how many times have they been wrong in the last year or 2 years or more? And so this can't be Russian disinformation. I would encourage people to go look at Tony Bobulinski's interview. The man is extremely credible. He's a longtime Biden family friend. He's a Democrat donor. You can look up his donations. They've all gone to Democrats. This isn't, you know, the vast right-wing conspiracy. And these are emails that are authenticatable. You know, you can authenticate them. You can see that in some cases. Now there's other batches of emails, and so we can kind of set them into several buckets. So there's the Bevan Cooney emails. Those are 100% authentic. We have the credentials. We're in his inbox. Google would have to be in on the conspiracy, if it were a conspiracy. So those are completely legitimate. Now Tony Bobulinski, he's got his verbal testimony and he has the text messages with timestamps to back it up. I mean, some might argue that, I don't know, Russia planted, text messages on his phone, or he's colluding with the Russians. It's actually amazing. I think the most striking part of his interview, is about an hour-long interview. The most striking part is, it was a very emotional part, where he says he just couldn't believe that this was like being called Russian disinformation. That's actually what led him to come forward, is he was just, this isn't Russian disinformation. I can't really describe it any better than he can. But when Adam Schiff goes out and says this is all just Russian disinformation, he's claiming that without evidence. Meanwhile, Biden's associate has mountains of evidence backing up his assertions.
Now, when it comes to the emails you've been provided with, I mean, it's important to note these are not leaks. These are not, well, kind of, but directly provided. It's provided by the person who owns the email address. In other words, you're not receiving hacked information or illegal information. It's the person providing you access to their personal email account, which has the accounts of all these different deals they've done. I guess, is this accurate, first off? And then what kind of information are you finding? Second.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. So we got written, signed authorization. Bevan Cooney is in jail right now for a scheme that has been linked to Hunter Biden. It was called the tribal bond scheme, where they, for lack of a better term, ripped off a bunch of Native Americans to fund what the prosecutors called basically a Ponzi scheme. So that involved Bevan Cooney, that's whose emails we have, and it also involved Devin Archer, who just recently had his conviction in that case reinstated. He's facing sentencing. So Devin Archer will in all likelihood go to jail for this scheme. And then Hunter Biden was, in the same group, investing in the same deals. His name is not on the documents. They make that clear in the indictments. But back to Bevan Cooney's emails. His lawyer gave us signed authorization from the client. We've talked with his brother, Scott, and his brother is helping us. And there's actually several more devices that they're trying to get access to. There are some photos of signing deals with the Chinese in the embassy in Beijing, which is just a huge, you don't do that. You don't go sign deals. So Ambassador Max Baucus, by the way, is a close family friend, and that's who they allegedly met. We haven't seen the photos, but Bevan Cooney is turning over everything, and he's just one of the first ones. There's been several subsequent, as I mentioned. Tony Bobulinski and another gentleman who's also in jail, Jason Galanis, is also wanting to, possibly share his information.
Now, the way this is playing out, it's interesting. If we look back in history, this may be kind of a funny analogy, but it reminds me actually of the Roman civil wars with Caesar. One of the last speeches Caesar gave in Pharsalia, right, this last battle in the Civil War, was that he who loses will be the one who is blamed. The criminal will be whoever loses, and the one who is deemed righteous in the doctrines of history will be whoever wins. Because the way I see this playing out is if Biden wins, very likely this is going to become the next Trump-Russia disinformation scandal. Very likely all this is going to be either thrown out, or people who are involved in it might actually be targeted. If Trump wins, very likely it might become the next Trump-Russia scandal, but if it contains actual evidence of criminality, we can expect, hopefully, depending on the way the FBI operates, that if there was criminality, it's prosecuted, meaning that the Trump administration could use this for prosecutions. Whoever wins this election very likely will decide which path the nation goes through, actually. I'm curious what your perspectives are on how this will unfold, Trump presidency or Biden presidency.
Right, so the FBI has been working with Tony Bobulinski, talked to Tony Bobulinski. As more files come out, I'm sure they'll be interested in seeing them. I mean, we're talking about massive sums of money from very suspicious or controversial countries: Russia, Ukraine, China, Kazakhstan. I mean, and this isn't Chinese capitalists. This is the Chinese Communist Party backing a venture run by the son of the vice president. It's unprecedented in its scope and scale, and so we'll continue to cover it. This is not an election issue, really. I mean, we want to get information out as it comes out, and disseminate it as quickly as we can. But this is, in all reality, going to take a very long time to untangle. I mean, we've just been given a mountain of information and data, and the attachments alone, there's thousands of them. And each one of them is this kind of a perspective, and they're drafts. So like the draft perspective for some venture, let's say it's the tribal bond venture, they're very colloquial, and they kind of spell out like, here's what we're going to do. And then when you go look at the finished product that they put out months later and became public, it's very different. So you have to actually go back through the drafts, and then you can kind of untangle what they were trying to do with whatever the venture may be.
Well, I think this is something people might be interested in is, first off, I guess, what size, what's the size of this? Are we talking like 10 gigabytes, terabytes? What is it?
Terabytes. This is terabytes.
Wow,
yeah.
Geez.
It was like, I think it was 19 gig. Well, if you combine what everyone is giving. So yeah, I would say ours is in the gigabytes, but if you combine what several of other Hunter Biden's business partners have brought forward and shown us and are trying to give open access. I mean, this is very invasive stuff. You feel somewhat uncomfortable, like especially with the Bevan Cooney inbox. I mean, I'm reading through his life, and I'd rather not, but it's that's the only way to go through it is systematically. We went back to the beginning and just started working our way forward, and it's a kind of a sad tale, and you see the personal troubles that came after the indictments came down, and it's personal stuff. So it's really, people don't often give you open access to their emails, and so it's going to take some sorting. And so the other people basically, they don't want to give us full access, and like totally understandable. And a lot of people, I see it in the comments online and whatnot, say, well, just release it like WikiLeaks, just put it all out there, and that's just not how it works. People don't want the entire world combing over their life. I mean, they came to who they thought could go through it as fast as possible. We've gone through it as fast as we can, but it will take time.
Well, and I know you're working pretty much around the clock, looking through these documents. What's the process you're going through to try to find out what would be of public interest? Because of course, a lot of people would say, "Oh, well, you're just going to release the stuff that serves your own political ideas." There's concern with that. Some people might say, "Oh, well, how do you know the full context in terms of what they're actually talking about?" Because sometimes guys will joke, sometimes they'll talk about deals that never come to light, and so sometimes you need that context. What would you say to people who have these concerns, both on the political level and the context level?
Yeah, it's kind of odd reading through emails because it's not a full picture. They've obviously had phone calls earlier that day. You don't have the full context. However, there are phrases and expressions that pretty much exactly what it means. Let's leverage. They use the word leverage Hunter Biden more. What are you going to leverage Hunter Biden more for? And then in the same email they'll say, should we talk? Like one of these emails they say, should we mention? They're talking about, this is Bevan Cooney, Jason Galanis, Devin Archer, talking about pitching to investors what they bring to the table, basically why investors should give them money. And he says, should we discuss our quote other currency? He uses the word currency, and then like ... the direct pipeline to the administration. There's not a whole lot of things that could mean. They viewed Hunter Biden as a pipeline to the administration, and time and again you see in these emails they're setting up meetings for Kazakh foreign ministers, for example. Devin Archer says, I'm setting up a call and I'm setting up a meeting for Foreign Minister Idrisov. I mean, it's very specific who the person is. It's very clear that he's talking about Secretary Kerry. I mean, he says Secretary of State John Kerry, who he's, by the way, friends with Chris Hines, the stepson of John Kerry. They were roommates together. This is Devin Archer. So it's pretty clear what they mean in some cases, and that's what we look for. I mean, we started by searching the word Biden. I mean, we don't want to put out their personal life. We're not trying to get them into trouble for some other deal they were doing. We just want to put out what's of public interest. So, I mean, these are private citizens, even though their names are known. So anyway, we started with Biden. but they use HB a lot to refer to Hunter Biden. In the Bobulinski emails, they refer to the big guy, and he says 100% that's Joe Biden. And again, Bobulinski, he's a friend and business partner. If he's a Russian agent, then that means that the Bidens were working with Russian agents. I mean, it's kind of ironic to say that this is Russian disinformation or whatever, because these are all Biden associates. So then, if that's true, Biden was associating with Russian agents. So that's kind of what we went through the emails and searched Biden, Hunter Biden. That's how we started, and realized that they use code words a lot, just nicknames, initials, etc. So then we would go to, let's say, Bohai Harvest, which was one of the Chinese ventures, and we find a lot on Bohai Harvest. Then we'll see Jonathan Lee is the CEO of one of these ventures with Hunter Biden. We find his email address, and then you search from this email address, and then you'll see all these emails come up. So that we kind of, there's no real rhyme or reason or method to the madness. We just go through it and search terms that we recognize and are familiar with, again, dating back to 2018 when these stories really first broke.
Now, with that said, folks, we're broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Also, if you want to support us, please join us on Patreon. You can find the link to that in the description below. And if you want to support the journalism of the Epoch Times, please consider subscribing to our online or print edition. Now, with that said, please tune in next time, stay informed, and stay free.